marketing consultant side. Like I can do that from anywhere. Like I can be outside in my yard planting plants and then doing the consulting at the same time. You know what I mean? So
Going
versus the
live.
SEO where it's like I just spent the day building a bunch of backlinks. It's so boring and tedious. It's always been boring and tedious to me, which is why I like software so much because I can just fill it out and be done with it. But when you got to build good ones, it's you're like, God, my fingers are bleeding and my eyes hurt. So, whereas consulting, I don't have to do that. Here's this guy, that guy, and that guy. Go buy some links from them and put them here. Use this anchor text and go make money. Okay.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining again for another episode of SEO Fight Club. We have a pretty cool show for you today. It's a type of show we call If They Can Do It, Then Why Can't I? It's where we review what a high-ranking website is doing to try to get ahead. So we kind of do a competitive analysis. But before we start, Clint, what was on SEO this week?
This week, 4 new news stories. They're relatively decent. Most of it's kind of newbie stuff. And then I did a walkthrough of InLinks and their content editor and how you can take stuff from other content editors, i.e. Pop, Surfer, Phrase, and put together your own system to actually rank with content only and save yourself a lot of trouble with backlink stuff, or at least make backlinking a little bit more enjoyable, as it were.
Very cool. So if you want to check out SEO this week, it's a great show. He does site audits. He goes over news. He details how to do various SEO tactics. Just go to YouTube and search for SEO this week. It'll be the first result. And remember to subscribe. So Dre, we have you here today. What's new on the SEO video show?
Hey, what's up, guys? This week I have Jason Barnard coming on, the brand SERP guy. He's all about saying that Google is your homepage and you should own all your results on your homepage on Google. So pretty cool. If you want to check that out this Friday at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I'm also doing a lot of giveaways. Check it out and you can see what I'm giving away this week.
Very cool. So yeah, if you want to find the SEO video show, you just go to YouTube, you search for SEO video show. It'll be the first result. Remember to subscribe. It's a great show. He does a ton of interviews of very famous and prominent and successful SEOs. So if you want to find out how people do it, what makes them tick, what the journey was like, and just various tips and tricks, it's another great show that you got to put in your rotation. So be sure to subscribe and check it out. So I don't think we have Lauren, do we?
I'm here.
Oh, you're here. Sorry, I didn't see you join and the list was cut off. So what's going on with IMG?
Yeah, so tomorrow we have the SEO Mastermind test review, and that's open to everyone in IMG. If you want to get a glimpse of what the testers have been up to, that's always a really exciting night. And then on Friday, we have an SEO pro tip from one of our instructors. He says that App Store optimization is actually one of the most undervalued areas that SEOs could be getting into right now. He sees totally green pastures, and he gives us a tip on how to get into it a little bit more. And then Tuesday, we have an AMA with Kyle Roof, which is very exciting, and that's our 5 p.m. evening time AMA. So if you don't get a chance to come in the mornings when we talk to Ted, it's also great to get a chance to talk to Kyle.
Yeah, this week on the AMA that we had on Tuesday, it was off the hook. Like people came prepared with awesome questions, and we went into overtime after the session ended. It was just an awesome session. So yeah, definitely take advantage of these. They're cool.
Yeah, for sure.
So that brings us to our topic today. If they can do it, why can't I? And so I started looking for, a high ranking website to dissect to try to figure out what's going on. And so the keyword I used was games. And I looked at the very first result, and I'm always very careful about what websites I pick. Like I don't go into an obscure keyword and find some small business SEO trying to get by and dissect what they're doing publicly. I don't want to out somebody. I've been watching this keyword for well over a decade. I know that Addicting Games has been top 5 for at least 10 years. So they're kind of out, there's no outing them. They've been there. And I've talked about them in the past, so we're revisiting what they're doing today because apparently, Google does all these updates, and obviously that 2007 SEO doesn't work anymore, does it? Well, we'll see. So here we are. We're looking at the keyword games. They rank number 1 for it. It's obviously a high competition keyword, high volume. And, right off the bat, we can see that they have a partial match domain. They have 3 title matches, which is aggressive. They have 7 summary matches, which is very aggressive. So just looking at what they're doing, it's already going against the grain of what most white hats would say is appropriate. But here they are, they're number 1 in Google. So usually the first thing I like to do is kind of look at the page and see what's on it. What are the zones that they're hoping human beings will interact with? And then we look underneath the surface at what they're actually doing on the page. And that will typically tell 2 different stories. So here, we kind of see, let me go back. We see some category tokens up at the top, and you can select more categories. There's some login stuff and some additional categories up in the corner. And then these are game tokens to specific games. And then they have a couple blog posts. It looks like they do 1 blog post a month in general. And then they have some footer details in their page footer. They also have a JavaScript time-based pop-up, which is supposedly a no-no. And they also have a pop-up persistent footer when you crawl, which is this part at the bottom. And it shows a few more games and an ad. So that's what's going on the page. Overall, when you look at this page, it looks like a pretty thin page. I took a closer look at the footer because oftentimes I can get a feel for how hard they're trying by what they do in the footer. And so they have some of the basic signals. They have their copyright message. They have a contact us page, terms of use, privacy policy, and they have a game syndication program of some sort. And I'm guessing that likely builds backlinks. So you get free games for your website. Guess what? You're probably making some backlinks out in the world. So that's looks like, kind of what they're doing from that footer section. So I looked at the source code of the page, and it had, 250,000 characters, 33,000, almost 800 words, which if you hard wrap at 100 characters per line, you're at 3,200 lines of code. And that's an awful lot for what we just saw here. There are 130 visible elements on this page that you can interact with. And there are, 3,200 lines of code for those 130 things. So right away, there's already an imbalance between what I'm seeing on the page in its most minimal presentation to how much code is underneath the surface. So there's probably more going on here. So I start looking at things, and usually I like to look at the head block. So that's what I'm doing here. So I'll just view source and I'll search for the keyword and I'll start looking at the head block. And I start to see a lot of the usual suspects. There's 8 matches in their meta description. They're using meta keywords. In testing, we found it's a no index zone currently, so it might be a vestigial practice where it used to work, so they did it and they haven't updated since it changed. But it certainly didn't hurt them. So anybody that thinks using your meta keywords hurts you, well, this hurt them all the way to number 1 in Google. So there's that. Full URLs. So when you have a partial match or exact match domain name, it's to your benefit generally to use full URLs to increase your keyword density, TF, IDF, things of that nature. At least historically it has been. Probably should be retested. But we see that practice in play as well. We see matches in Open Graph and Twitter cards, and the 3 title matches we saw before are still in the title here. So it's looking like a pretty aggressive keyword density play. So just by looking at the head block, feels like they're going for density. So we see another vestigial SEO tactic. They're using the keyword and CSS class names here. So here they are being defined in a style block. And so we found 213 matches and CSS class names. And just out of curiosity, I took one, this one that's addiction-game-sec. So before, about a year ago, you'd be able to index a page with a keyword in one of these, which means I could go to Google and search for that invented keyword I used as a class name and find the page. You try that today and it doesn't work. So when I search for addiction game sec, there's no match found. So that just confirms that this is a no index zone, and this is most likely a vestigial SEO tactic that used to work in the past, and they haven't updated it in their current page. So another thing I like to do is I like to start to look at the little containers. So they'll format those game tokens, they'll format their menus, they'll format their links. And usually there's a little bit of container HTML around them. And I like to look at those containers and see what they're doing, because oftentimes they'll figure out clever ways to get more keyword usage into those containers. So here we have a menu item. So they're using an LI tag. They have class names here, and one of the class names is a keyword. They have a link, and there's a relative URL here. They could have gone absolute to get another keyword mention, but they didn't for some reason. But there's a keyword in the relative URL. They're using a title attribute, which is the hover tooltip. When you hover the link, this is what appears. And they put in the keyword, then there's the link text. So their menu item gets 4 keyword matches per menu item in this case. So that's pretty good for, a link getting 4 keyword matches. Down here, let's see, what are we looking at? We're looking at one of the category tokens. And in here, we can see that there's a div with some div text. They have a URL with a keyword match. They have an image inside of that link. So there's a link here, and instead of link text, they have an image. They have a full URL that gets 2 keyword matches in there. They neglected to use their alt text. So that was interesting, but that's another case where a clickable entity on the page that people could interact with, one thing had 4 keywords. So again, pretty aggressive keyword density play. So I looked at a game token next and saw that the game tokens got up to 7 matches. So if we go back, we're talking about these little image links here. So that was interesting that those could get 7 matches. And I know this is hard to read, so I'll just describe it. They have a link with the URL with the keyword. Then they have an image, the image you see in the game token with the partial match domain and URL matches. So the image name had a match there too. Then they have a link, and the URL of the link again has the keyword and then the link text. So I guess below the image, that has the keyword as well. Then there's, I guess, an interesting piece. There is a video thumbnail that is hidden that's part of the token that has the partial match domain as well as a video with the keyword in it. And so that's how they got that thing to have 7 matches. They could have had 8 if they used full URLs. They could have had 9, 10. So it's interesting, and they left off the title attributes. They probably could have had somewhere between 12 and 16 just on this one game token. So it's interesting that they didn't take it to the full extreme. But clearly there's more that you can do to be even more aggressive than what they did. It's interesting that across the board they ignored the alts. They have the alts there in the source code, and they're there for every token, but they're all empty. And so that struck me as odd, because so far looking at this website, they're being very deliberate in their tuning. You don't accidentally tune this way. When you're tuning like this, it's very deliberate SEO. They're ranking number 1, so I'm assuming that they have a good foundation in SEO. They've been working at it a while. They have some sort of a plan that's got them above Wikipedia and Nintendo and a bunch of other serious players. So it starts to make me think, do they know something that I don't? Why did they dial back their very aggressive tuning? Maybe they're trying to slow down the arms race, so they only do enough to be number 1, and then they pull it all back. Because if they go too aggressive, maybe their competitors just tune to a higher standard. I don't know. Maybe they don't care about SEO and they stumbled into first place. It's possible. But I would guess that, maybe there's something here that they know that I don't know for why they're not competing as aggressively as they could, especially with alt text, which is such an obvious play. When you hover the game tokens, this is one of the cool UI things I saw there. I have an image here, but when you hover one of these games, it shows you a video within the same size of the image. So while you hover, the hover state is a playing video that shows you the gameplay. I thought that was really innovative. When I saw that, I was like, wow, that would have been amazing in online retail. Like if I would do that in a product category where you see the diamond engagement ring, and when you hover it, it gives you the 3D view of rotating around the diamond engagement ring. That is a very cool treatment. And so to see that it was, innovated and, free online games, like that's a really cool piece of technology they did right there. I thought that was neat. The other part of that, though, is that handling those video thumbnails adds 2 to 4 more matches per game token, so that 7 becomes 9 to 11 because of the video handling code. So I thought that was really cool that the keyword density continues to ratchet up per game token on this page. Another thing that I just couldn't figure out was the links on this page. If I go back, maybe I can barely see it. Yeah, right here. It's very tiny, but it says type of equals FOAF::image. And that's a schema markup, and it appears to be being misused. So I think it's some kind of vestigial schema, maybe something from the olden days, possibly. Not sure how it's even being used in this context. But this FAOF schema for images, this is called friend of a friend. And I don't see why it even belongs on this page, but they're not using standard image schema. They're using friend of a friend image schema, and we have no idea why. So this stuck out like a sore thumb, and I have no idea how they're using it, how it interacts with other websites or applications. So kind of a mystery. And this is the only schema they use. They don't even use JSON LD. So keep that in mind. They went to number 1 without using schema in the way that we all normally use schema. So another outlier for this website ranking first. So I started to look at keyword density, and so, there's a lot of keyword usage on this page. They had over 1,000 mentions of game on the page. They have a pretty high word count in the raw source. When I get rid of the HTML and the scripts and the style sheets and the comments, and you get rid of all that stuff, you get what we call the clean keyword density, which is the number that most SEOs tend to think of as something along the lines of the clean density. Keyword density, because it can be calculated so many different ways, it's a spectrum. And the raw density is the most inclusive calculation. Clean is the most exclusive. Most SEOs think of the clean end of the spectrum when they think about that number. So the clean keyword density here is 5%. I calculated it manually using wordcounter.net. Then I ran a Quora report and decided to check it as well, and got 5% as well out of Quora. So 2 different ways of calculating it came to the same answer. And when I looked at the other websites, 2%, 1%, 2%, it's an aggressive keyword density play for sure. So the measurements don't lie. That's aggressive keyword density compared to the competitors. So I decided to take a look at what I would have to do to my SEO Tool Lab website if I wanted to have, a competitive on-page tuning for this keyword. Because obviously my website isn't in the game space, so I have none of what I need. So this is all of what I need to make that transition to be competitive to be competitively tuned for on page. Now, keep in mind, there's a massive off-page game that's not here as well. But if I just wanted to dial it in, entities in HTML, I need almost 2,000 more. Search terms on the whole web page, I need 670 more. Entities and sentences, 556 more. Keywords in the body tag. Now, these numbers are looking at the top measurements for the top 3 websites. So it's trying to compete with them as a cluster. But there's a lot here I'd have to aggressively tune in order to be competitive for this keyword. That's an awful lot. I also wanted to look at the sentences being used. So Quora also pulls a report on the sentences. And so it grabs them from the top ranking websites, and it tells us what entities are in there, the entity count. And so you can get an idea. I know it's hard to read, so I'll read this top one. Play the best free games, deluxe downloads, puzzle games, word and trivia games, multiplayer card and board games, action and arcade games, poker and casino games, pop culture games, and more. So those are obviously keyword rich, they're entity rich. We listed the detected entities. And oftentimes when I'm trying to compete, I will take a look at these sentences and I'll try to outdo them. I'll be like, okay, well, that top one, they left out crossword and Sudoku, and they didn't have sports. And so by eyeballing the entities that occur throughout, I can potentially create more entity-rich content by taking advantage of those opportunities. But it's clear that in this game, they are aggressively tuning their content to be keyword rich and entity rich. Another thing I like to look at is the top words. So another report out of Quora is it gives you the top 30 words as part of a frequency distribution, where the most frequently used word on the page is at the top, and then they get incrementally weaker. We give you the top 30 across the board, and we highlight the variations. And so we could see here that, among the top words they reference are games. And I feel that's often important. It sometimes doesn't show up this clearly because sometimes there's a very strong off-page game. But oftentimes we see that it's beneficial to have your target keywords being the most frequently used terms on the page. When you look at like 32 over here, which is Nintendo, they have some authority to play with. They're not a small player in this space. But, Google might get the wrong idea. It might be about Pokemon, which has the highest frequency, or Nintendo. If you're looking at the entities, it might be that games comes third or fourth in priority, where over here, games is coming first in priority. So we like to see that the yellow clusters at the top. And over here at Wikipedia, they had more usage, but it's not about necessarily having more in this game. It's about sending the right signal about what your page is about, and having all the other signals, the diversity of SEO factors, the trust signals, the backlinks, the click-through rate, things of that nature. And I'd be willing to bet that when somebody searches for games, they're probably not eager to click on Wikipedia. So probably a misfire most of the time for that result, which is why I guess they rank so poorly. But also, I know that there are some pretty aggressive SEOs in this top 5 grouping. So what do you guys think is going on with a site like this? Why can't everybody play this same game?
I think one of the biggest things on these is you have to realize that they didn't create this page in a day. And that's one of the biggest things when you see, I think, why can they cheat? Why they can cheat and why can't I? Is that it evolved over time. So it's not the kind of thing that you could just today create that page and expect to compete, but those pages got to where they are over years. And it's not the same thing as creating the exact same page in one day and launching and expecting to compete against that.
Yeah, that's a good point. What do you think, Clint?
I'd be interested to see what Cora said about the links and the result that it got on the backlink information from Ahrefs and SEMrush. You've been talking about that games market for quite some time, so it doesn't really surprise me that you saw the results you saw. But yeah, I'd be interested in backlink stuff because you kind of hit it on the head that they offer that free game service, so they have a backlink building program in place. I'd like to see the effects of it. Maybe their anchor text choice on people that are using their systems to get the free games and that, and see what that creates for them.
Yeah, I did look a little bit, and one of the things I found is that they were being promoted by Nickelodeon, which I believe is a Viacom property. And Viacom has an awful lot of big name properties. And going back to the early days of SEO, they were the original gangsters of link wheels. They had the prototype perfect link wheel, and they kind of still do to this day. So they can cross link, MTV and BET and Nickelodeon and all these other properties to great advantage. And so addictinggames.com definitely has some of that love coming to it.
Ted, I took a quick look at Friend of a Friend, and it mentions that it's related to the Dublin core, or they like kind of feel an association between the two. But something I was just kind of thinking of is I wonder if you used just some oddball schema markup, and Google's like, I don't know why you're doing that, but it seems like you could be doing it for very valid reasons. So I'm not going to do anything particularly with it, except I will count it. That like it's kind of one of those things that's well, I don't know what this is, but there's obviously a good reason that you're trying to make these connections for this particular schema that might be very valid. And so as a result, it allows you to get fringe SEO on the page in a legitimate way, that Google won't discount it because there could be a very legitimate reason for using it. And it's not anything that's overly familiar with. And so it's not seeing it as something that's manipulative. It kind of gets a free pass, if you will.
Yeah, I was wondering if there may be something about that, like maybe an image search, it just like gets an auto inclusion or something.
Because it looks like they're missing kind of the connector on Friend of a Friend. The idea is that you've got a thing and it connects with a person, I think is what's the intention is supposed to be.
Yep.
And they don't have any of the other elements you're allowed to use, like the description that would maybe make that connection, or that other thing that
or the name or the people
right.
know. Yeah.
So it's like it's interesting where you're using something perhaps incorrectly, but you might get a free pass and then can basically fringe stuff SEO into those areas.
Yeah.
What's interesting is I dove down into that a little bit, and the intent looks like to build up, let's say Kyle Roof, high voltage SEO, Kyle at HV SEO, whatever, that sort of thing there. And the image, the way to describe it is the image should be an image of the subject. So you could have an image of Kyle, or an image of Kyle and, Clint Butler, friend of a friend, those sort of side of things. But those are the uses that they describe for images. And these are clearly not people images. So that was where I was kind of scratching my head and going, I wonder if they've gone a little bit to the dark arts here to get a little authority, or build up some things that Friend of a Friend wasn't intended to do. But I don't know. I'd never heard of that schema until Ted popped it up and said, he was finding some of that stuff, and I was like, what?
Yeah. So sometimes just looking at a number one ranking in a competitive way can lead to interesting finds. And maybe there's something there, maybe there's not. So, what do you think I should do next on this analysis? I know Clint wants me to detail more of the off page. Anything you guys would recommend?
I thought about you when you were going through there, some of the places where they have keywords, you said that those zones currently in testing, don't show up as zones where Google is pulling data from. So if you took your word count and took word count only from zones that people that Google is reading for those purposes of indexing keywords, I wonder what your true density might look like. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, the clean density filters out most of that stuff. So the clean density will delete the head block, the CSS inline styles, the JavaScript blocks, the comments, and then after that, it'll delete the HTML tags, and then all you're pretty much left with at that point is the text content that would have been visible on page, or visible in some state on page, like when you hover the menu, the link text. And so that when we say a clean density, we're calculating the clean, we're calculating that keyword density with that reduced part of the source that is just the content text.
Right. But some of those zones that are not visible on the page, Google counts. So I was wondering, about if you counted, the text in those zones as well, you'd get a maybe a different look at density, and maybe they're getting additional advantage. Maybe their true density is not 5%; it's 15% when you look at it that way.
Yeah, and that's why I tell people that no two people's idea of keyword density is exactly the same, because where do you draw the word count? Where do you draw the match count from? So what you're suggesting might translate to something that looks like, let's calculate keyword density using the title, the meta description, title attribute text, alt attribute text, the content text, and maybe keywords and URLs. And that would be like one definition of how you could calculate keyword density. But how many SEOs calculate density exactly that way? And that's kind of the problem with keyword density. That's why we look at it as a spectrum. But you're right. If we calculated keyword density using only the known indexable zones of a page, maybe we get a more meaningful number. That's an interesting thought.
Ted, Mike and Everhart are kind of on the same thing too. On something to look at would be the amount of internal links they've got going on and what the anchor text for those internal links looks like.
Yeah, and those links were rich with keyword matches, the URLs and the anchor text. So that would be an interesting place to look.
And then I also like in chat, Thane's got an interesting idea. He's talking about off page, but also even on page, the concept of factor diversity. They've hit more areas, which allows them to do more. So they've touched on more factor areas, which allows them to cheat more, essentially.
Yeah, and there's an algorithm specifically for that, and it's called a web spam algorithm. You've probably heard us talk about it before in the past, called MC4. And the way MC4 works is that if you exploit a minority of factors, like I'm only going to exploit backlinks and I'm going to get 500,000 backlinks, the algorithm sees that about your page and it says, for your page only, we're just not going to count backlinks. And the way you get around that is you don't exploit a minority of factors. You diversify your factors, and in so doing, you can exploit them more. And so, yeah, there could very well be a diversity MC4 like situation happening. Kyle Arnold also said that friend of a friend could also have been previously more detailed in the code, and we could use the Wayback Machine to see if they pulled down more detailed markup from the pages in the past, and maybe it just got left behind by mistake. And that's totally plausible. That's an expert tip right there. So use Wayback Machine to see what the past schema markup looked like. I have a feeling that's going to come back for some other purpose in the future. Yeah, I'm reading a comment from Carolyn that's coming out of Wikipedia. It's more of the services that friend of a friend is used in. So yeah, this definitely begs the question that if there's over optimization as a penalty, whatever your model is for over optimization has to account for outliers like this. Clearly these guys have been doing this for a long time. I've always known them to have thousands of keyword matches on page. That's not a new thing. Kyle's right, they've been doing it for a long time. It isn't new. And they do have good diversity as well. So, they have traffic, they have backlinks, they have their trust factors, they have relevancy, so they have a lot of things working for them. So they're not exploiting just the keyword density. And their off page is going to be substantial. But it's interesting. It's something that you should be doing, maybe not with websites that are like this massive and this old, but maybe that competitor that you've been trying to replace at number 6 or number 7, maybe take a look at what they're doing more competitively. Any final thoughts, guys? Nope.
No,
And
always fun. Always fun.
awesome. Then we shall see you next week with another show. And remember to check out SEO This Week and the SEO video show. If you need more content, we're all here slaving away to give you the best SEO content that no money can buy. So it's a labor of love. So remember to subscribe. We count on your subscriptions. And thank you, everyone.